Laying out and cutting a sewing pattern. Learning to use a commercial sewing pattern can open up a world of sewing possibilities. It allows you to get creative with combining fabrics and styles. Maybe you've done a little sewing and you found that you're ready for this next step. We're here to help. The envelope of a commercial sewing pattern is full of helpful information. You can find your size by comparing your measurements to the chart on the top flap of the envelope or on the back of the envelope. Your pattern size will most likely be larger than your normal street size, so if you're falling into an unusual category, don't panic. And if you're in between sizes, think about which parts of the garments are fitted and base your choice off of that. When in doubt, size up. You can always take it in a little later. And while the size charts include all of the sizes that the pattern is available in, not all of those sizes will be in the envelope. Be sure you check the front so that you have the correct size. The envelope will also tell you how much fabric to buy, so no need to guess. Use the chart on the back to find the style and size you're making, and it should tell you how much fabric to buy, whether the fabric you choose is 45 inches or 60 inches wide. You can also find a list of suggested fabrics and notions you will need to finish this project. It can be extremely helpful to take this envelope with you to the fabric store or have a picture on hand as reference. Once you know the style and size that you're making, you can begin cutting the paper pattern pieces. Inside the envelope, there are big sheets of tissue paper, which have all of your pattern pieces printed on them. There is also a set of instructions. Your instructions will have a list of pattern pieces, and which styles correspond to which pattern pieces. Depending on what you're making, you may need to cut out all of the pattern pieces, so reference this list before cutting. The pattern pieces are numbered, so cut the numbers you need from the list. Each piece will have several lines for different sizes, so only cut out the size that you need. Now you're ready to lay out your fabric. You will find that there are 2 finished edges of your fabric and 2 unfinished cut edges of your fabric. The finished edges are called selvage edges. On a woven fabric, anything that is parallel to those sides is your lengthwise grain, and anything going the opposite direction will be your cross grain. The diagonal will be your bias. This is important because the bias stretches, whereas the lengthwise and the cross grains do not. So when you lay out your pattern pieces, we want to keep them on the grain so that the finished garment drapes correctly, doesn't stretch in weird places, and also fits your body correctly. Start by folding your fabric in half with your selvage edges together. You can pin them together if the fabric feels like it's going to slip around. You will now have a fold line opposite of your selvages, and this fold line should be on the grain. You will notice that most of the pattern pieces have a straight line with arrows on either end. This is called your grain line. You have to make sure that this line is parallel with the selvages and with the fold line. Do this by choosing one end of the line and measuring to the edge of the fabric, either the fold or the selvage. It can be any distance, but you may want to choose a round amount, such as a 5 even, rather than a 5 3/8. Remember this amount and pin this end of the grain line to the fabric. Then go to the other end of the grain line and do the same thing. Now that you've gotten your pattern piece on the grain, you can pin all the way around the pattern piece. Be sure to pin close to the edge, but not over the edge, as this is where you'll need to cut. There is another type of pattern piece which will say cut 1 on fold, with small arrows pointing to the straight edge of your pattern piece. For pieces like this cut on the fold, begin by lining up the edge of the fold you created when you first folded the fabric in half. Pin this edge first, like we pin the grain line first on the other pieces, then pin the rest of the piece. Sometimes you might have to flip the pattern piece over so that the fold line will be equal to the fold line on the pattern piece. Pieces that have a grain line will most likely say cut 2, because your fabric is folded in half and you will end up cutting 2 pieces that mirror one another. You may have pieces that say to cut a different amount. You can adjust accordingly by cutting through just 1 layer of fabric or repeating this process more than once. Make sure that you have accurately pinned all pattern pieces before cutting. Your instructions may have a guide for you to follow if you get stuck or if you're having trouble figuring out how to cut everything on your fabric. Once everything is pinned into place, you're ready to cut. When cutting your fabric, be sure to keep your scissors close to the table and keep the fabric as flat as you can. You want to cut right on the line of the pattern piece you are using. And that's it! You're ready to cut out your first sewing pattern.